This is Generations. Kevin Swanson with you. And abortion kills kids, but train a society to kill its kids. And what do you think will happen to the kids who make it out of the womb alive? Let me clue you in on this. Tons of abuse. A society that kills its kids will abuse its kids. That's a truism. Should be obvious. It's a logical inference. A society that kills its kids will abuse its kids. You destroy natural love for children with mothers, and you're going to deal with a breakdown of family and a host of problems in human society. 65% of viable children never make it out of the womb, killed by abortifacients and abortion in this country today by latest calculations. But let's go back to Plato. Okay, so Plato suggested a society in which children belong to the state. So a couple comes together for a temporary liaison. The woman has a baby. The baby comes out into the hands of state officials, and they take over from there. And Plato says, no father shall know his child, and no child shall know his father. That's critical for a socialist totalitarian state. That's what they want. But how do you get there? That's the question I want to address briefly in this intro. How does the socialist state get to this utopia, in quotes? Every socialist progressive knows you've got to demoralize a society if the state will tyrannize that society. That's the first premise for any member of the Democrat Socialist Party of your respective nation, my friends. You have to demoralize in order to tyrannize, because either you'll be governed by God or by God you'll be governed, as our founders would say. You've got to break down the morals of the people if government will gain control over every aspect of human life and action on planet Earth. So here's the process. Okay, so walk through this with me. Step one, encourage feminism, independence of women, convenience divorce, and abortion where they can kill their children, demoralize them, destroy natural love, essential. Step two, teach sexual looseness in every media offering provided to the masses. Get the divorce rate up to 40%, better yet, 50%. Make sure 50 to 75% of men and women shack up together before they get married, and thereby encourage as much child abuse as possible. Make sure that at least 25 to 30% of the population of children attending public school are sexually abused. Our Gen 2 numbers, where we looked at 10,000 Generation X graduates, found 19% of public school kids have been sexually abused by their own admission, and only 3.5% of homeschooled kids. But get your society good and demoralized. That's critical. That's step two. Step three, then, the ultimate goal is to raise up bureaucrats, social planners, and professionally trained state workers to interfere with families, shift children around from house to house, sex educate them in the schools, molest them in foster homes, and perpetuate the dysfunctionality so you can perpetuate more bureaucracy in the next generation. Remember the goal. The ultimate goal is total government, total socialist control over all the children in a given society. Be sure that you're telling the electorate it's for the children. It's for the children. It's for the health of the children. But keep in mind, your ultimate goal is not the health of the children. The goal is total government. The goal is to demoralize. The goal is to get society to kill 50 to 75% of their kids so that government may control every facet of human life and existence. Now, the modern system called Child Protective Services or social services comes with a breakdown of the family that was intentionally brought about by the social planners of the last 5 generations. Okay, so now biblically, how do we work with the dysfunctionality created by these ungodly, wicked systems? That's the big question for the day. Well, first, you've got to ban abortion. That's number one. Number two, you've got to eliminate child protective services entirely and revert criminal activity to the decisions of judges and courts based upon real evidence. And then three, we need to rely heavily on churches and private adoption agencies to deal with abandoned children wandering the streets. That's worked very well for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Okay, but all right. So here we are with the current system. How are we going to function within the system that we find ourselves in today? Bradley Pierce is chief counsel with Heritage Defense, joins us now on Generations. How do you work with this? How do you avoid a CPS investigation? That's the subject today. And Bradley, you heard my introduction there. I want to revert it back to judges, a court of law where the courts need to do, not bureaucrats. Okay, that's my position. That's where I believe we need to go. That's a biblical position.
Right.
How does this sort of investigation differ from just an ordinary court situation where somebody is accused of a crime and you've got to deal with it in a court of law? How does it differ when you bring bureaucrats into the picture?
Yeah, what a lot of people don't realize is that the courts have decided that criminal defendants actually have more constitutional rights than parents do in Child Protective Services cases.
Terrible.
Right? Because when the founders created the Constitution or the state constitutions, they did not envision what we would call a quasi-criminal jurisdiction. That this kind of, it's not civil and it's not criminal. It's something in between, and it kind of gets the worst of both worlds. You get the parents get the least protection, but there's still the maximum penalty. In some ways, Child Protective Services can bring, I would say, even a greater penalty than the criminal justice system could bring. I would much rather get the death penalty for something than to have my children stripped away from me and my wife. In fact, some courts have even called, rightfully, have called termination of parental rights the civil death penalty. But yet parents don't get constitutional rights there. Because it exists in this world that there's not a crime that's been committed, right? So there's this perceived harm to children that's not really a crime, but it's something that the state thinks is bad parenting.
Super severe, super tough, which means you've got to have, if you are raising children in the 2020s in the US of A, USSA, United Socialist States of America, you have better have some decent defense on day one. And that's why you exist. What can attorneys do to help on day one?
That's exactly, and that's why we started Heritage Defense, 16 years ago now, because we were helping families. Don Hart and I, he's the president here. We were helping families. Some families would contact us at the very beginning of the case, and we could help them. Some families would wait. Attorneys are expensive, and a lot of homeschoolers are like, "Hey, I'm gonna do it yourselfer, so I'm gonna, do it myself." Legal defense. So they would go a little while before they got an attorney involved. And what we found was that the cases where you could get an attorney involved from the very beginning went way better than the cases where people tried to do it themselves. And at that point, after they tried to get us involved, as we say here in Texas, the horse is already out of the barn, and it's a lot more difficult and a lot more damage control at that point.
What can you do? What does the attorney do right off the gate, right out of the bat?
Yeah, right
before the horse makes it out of the gate.
Well, it's just like like in a criminal case, many of us have seen on TV or videos. When someone gets arrested for a crime, they're told, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Well, that's not typically told to parents in a CPS case, even though that's the same thing is true. That is, as soon as you're talking, you're giving them evidence. As soon as you let them in your door, you're giving them evidence. As soon as you let them talk to your children, you're giving them evidence that they don't have, and evidence that they can misconstrue, either intentionally or unintentionally. And so having an attorney involved from the very beginning, so those interactions, you're not trying to hide child abuse or anything like that. We don't defend actual child abuse. That's part of our policy. But there are so many cases that are false reports, that are overblown reports, that can be misconstrued. And so that's what the attorney is there to help keep that from happening.
All right. So a family that's a member of Heritage Defense gets the phone call, the knock on the door. What do? What's the first thing they do?
We tell them, be polite and just say, "Excuse me one moment while I get my attorney on the phone. Step back inside and call us, and you can reach us 24/7. That's the first thing to do.
First thing to do. All right. And then do you let them in the house?
We tell parents, do not let them, get us on the phone, and then we will talk to you and see, what's going on. What do you think the allegations are? What's been said so far? Do you have any idea why they're there? It can kind of figure out what's going on. There's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all, but we're trying to, in every case, let CPS know the children are okay, the children are safe, but minimize intrusion into the
Yeah.
family's privacy, and minimize stress and trauma to the family.
Are there instances in which they hand the phone to the CPS investigator through the door and just say, "Hey, talk to my attorney. He wants to talk to you"?
Yes. Yep. We do that all the time. Sometimes the investigators don't want to talk to us, and we have to get on the phone with their supervisor or their attorneys, or sometimes, we'll talk directly to them right there. A lot of times, we'll also just say, "Hey, just get their bit." We'll talk to them, and if they don't want to talk to us, hey, get their business card, and we'll get in contact with them and follow up and handle this in a way that's way less confrontational than on your doorstep.
I want to go to proactive here. I mean, we're talking reactive, once the investigation has initiated, but let's go proactive. For the average family, Christian family, homeschooling family out there, how do they avoid a CPS social services investigation? And here's one thing that's really interesting. I was in the workplace, this was a number of years ago, but we was sitting in a lunchroom with probably 3-4 engineers. I was an engineer in the corporate world, and there were probably 3-4 guys around the table, and they all had either had to go through a social services investigation, or they knew somebody who had, like a close friend or family member who'd been through a social service investigation. I was just shocked. I was like, what? This is that common? In that this random group of guys at a, and there's white collar engineering type of people, sort of ordinary American folk, not necessarily Christians, but they'd all been through a social services investigation. I'm like, oh man, this is pretty serious. But can we avoid it? Can a family avoid this kind of thing?
I mean, there's some things you can do and some things you can't. I mean, like you're saying, there a lot of people who have gone through these investigations wrongfully. Over 93% of reports made to CPS nationwide are unfounded. Over 83% of the investigations that they actually do are unfounded, that they determine themselves to be unfounded. And so there's a lot of innocent families out there that are having to go through these stressful investigations. There's having a good relationship with a doctor is very important. A doctor who respects that you're the parent, they're there to provide advice. But they're not there to second guess all of your parenting decisions. They're not there to ask, your children whether you have guns in the home and all kind of other things. So having a good relationship there. And then there's just lots of common sense things about, hey, don't leave your children in the car, even if you legally can. Be careful about leaving children in the car while you run into businesses. And a lot of things that we actually have on our website. We have a law and policy vault, we call it, where we have laws of all 50 states that you don't even have to be a member. You can just go log into our website for free and access that and find out what are the laws in your state. And obviously, be sure that you're working within those, and that'll help avoid a lot of cases, but not all of them. There's only so much you can do.
The big one are anonymous tips. The big one would be the neighbor, the relative. And I mean, isn't that probably the worst and the most common?
Actually,
where somebody turns you in?
What we see is the most common is actually the medical community, because we have laws in every state for mandatory reporters that make different vocations are mandatory reporters, but in every state, the medical community is included in that. And so they can, if they do not report any suspicion of child abuse or neglect, they can lose their license that they've worked long and hard for and paid a lot of money for. They can be sued. They can even go to jail. And so we've basically put a gun to the head of mandatory reporters and said, you have to report. And so we end up with major over-reporting happening just to cover themselves. And so we see hospitals and doctors that have lots of policies, like if you have a child that comes in with an oblique or spiral fracture, automatic report. You have a child with more than one recent injury, automatic report. You have a child under 2 years old with a suspected head injury, automatic report. We had a case where a mom was at the park with her child walking around, slipped and fell, with her 8-month-old, and thought he was okay, but wanted to be sure, went to the hospital, thought he had hit his head. They checked him out, said he was fine, but they said, oh, but we are reporting this to CPS. And she said, why? Well, we have a policy reporting any suspected head injury of a child under 2. It's like, well, yeah, but you ruled out the child doesn't have a head injury. Yes, but there was a suspected head injury. So automatic report. So you have a lot of policies in place that really is not about the patient. It's really just about protecting the doctors and the hospitals.
It seems to me we need something of a, I don't know, maybe it's a hidden list of doctors or hospitals that are, operating in some form of sanity or rationality, and perhaps, relationships where you've begin to develop some trust with your doctor, with and probably not just go to some random health service somewhere. Is that the solution to this?
I think that can definitely help, right? As far as your primary care physician, that can help, but you have an injury or something that comes up, you don't really get to choose necessarily who your urgent care physician is going to be or who your hospital physician or nurses are going to be. So, there just requires a lot of wisdom navigating those situations, which and again, another reason that families call us 24/7 is they just say, hey, I'm on the way to the hospital, or they say, hey, I'm at the hospital, I'm having a little bit of a dispute here, and we can help them kind of navigate those situations. We do that all the time.
Yeah. Well, you do that. You've got to be busy.
We stay pretty busy.
You've got to be busy with the environment the way it is these days.
Yes, we stay very busy. But that's what we're here. That's why this is a ministry. We're a nonprofit.
Yeah.
We saw a need for this, and that's why we're doing this.
Well, it's wonderful that you've got a ministry to. I guess it's mainly homeschooling families. Who do you service most?
Yeah, right now it's limited to Christian homeschooling families. So families that are doing majority of the education at home. Families can do other things that are educational and just like you talk about all the time, family discipleship. But the majority of it needs to be in home because the moment your child is in some kind of school, even a private school. In many states, they can be removed from class and interviewed by Child Protective Services workers without any consent by you or even notice to you. And so there's a whole different kind of laws that apply whenever your child is outside of the home, outside of your presence.
Bradley, is there anything else parents can do to prevent, relationships with neighbors? Building trust with others is probably pretty critical to avoiding a CPS investigation, but anything else to put onto this?
I think that there's a lot of things that parents can do. I think just be aware that this is a possibility, and just think about, is somebody misunderstanding what I'm doing as a parent, and going and communicating with them if you think that there is a misunderstanding there. Because there's a lot of we even get churches that report families. Because some child says something that gets misconstrued, misunderstood, and instead of coming and talking to parents about it, they just make a CPS report. And so again, even there, I think that something churches can even do is hey, talk to parents, before you make reports because of something 4-year-old Billy said, hey, find out what they'll get the other side of the story first. But just being aware of it, I think, is a big part of the battle.
Well, obviously, it's important for Christians to more and more engage with the defense organizations, whether it be defense organizations that help out with churches or private Christian businesses or with families like this. It seems to me the environment has changed since the 1980s and 1990s. Think about it, Bradley. I don't think you had any of these huge Christian legal defense organizations way back in the 70s and 80s. Something has changed in this nation. We're setting the wrong trajectory. I mean, would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
We're heading towards totalitarianism or some sort that's going to actually persecute Christians and Christian families. That appears to be the direction taken. At least, if you're looking at all of these Christian defense organizations that have propped up over the last, I'm going to say, 25 years.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a war against the biblical family and having the government come in. And it's also invited just by the sin of our own country, right? Like you said, you either be governed by God. Well, when people are not governing themselves, they invite more government. We're seeing a lot of that. And unfortunately, it's not just the guilty that are being governed, it's the innocent as well. Yeah.
We all get taken up in this totalitarian role that's occurring across this country. Of course, we're hoping that somehow there'll be a reduction of the size of government. I try to bring the biblical standard to bear on the program, as you heard from the front side of the program. But so far, I'm not seeing much rollback in government funding, government power, government institutions, even under the Trump administration. It's been a little disappointing, to be honest. The big, beautiful bill just added more government.
Yes, it did. Yep. Yeah, we did not get a whole lot of Doge, D-O-G-E, out of this administration, even though that's what we thought. But it's not.
And granted, so much of this has got to happen in the local states, right?
Yes.
In terms of state funding of education, state funding of social services and family issues, we've got to roll back a lot of this government, and hopefully at some point, we can bring a biblical worldview to bear. And perhaps sometime in the future, freedom from big government control might return somewhere in the world. I guess that's my hope, my prayer.
Mine as well.
Well, friends, we've been talking to Bradley Pierce, who is the chief attorney for Heritage Defense, and I highly recommend. How do they sign up, folks? Sign up for your defense organization, Bradley? What's the best way to do that?
They can just go to our website, heritagedefense.org, and check that out there and submit an application there. And
what does it cost?
It's $21 a month, or if families want to do the whole year at one time, you get 2 months free.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's super reasonable for one of the most important elements of family freedoms you could ever imagine. Friends, I don't think there's anything more important, as you said, Bradley, than not losing your children to the control of the Child Protective Services. I can't think. You can lose your house, you can lose your junk, you can lose your job, but who wants to lose their kids? I think that was your point, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. I'd rather lose my life, than to have my children taken away from me by the state.
That's heritagedefense.org to sign up for that legal protection, my friends. Again, heritagedefense.org. And this is Kevin Swanson and Bradley Pierce on this edition of the program, inviting you back again next time as we continue to lay down a vision for the next generation. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.